Welcome to Identity Unboxed, where we provide mentorship and promote representation for Black professionals in the advancement of the Black community.
We are seeking guidance from exceptional Black leaders, scholars, and professionals with expertise in their respective fields.
We hope to foster a space that promotes authenticity, inclusivity, and restoration for our listeners while exploring the intersection of our personal and professional lives.
This project is a culmination of our lived experiences as young Black professionals to transform our life trajectories, to overcome adversity, and reach triumph.
Our intention is to inspire you on your path to discovering your purpose.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Simon, for joining us on Identity Unboxed. You are the Deputy Chief Executive Officer at King County Regional Homelessness Authority, and we're super excited to have you here. For nearly 2 decades, you've been a leader in driving systems change across various industries. In these roles, you have been dedicated to advancing equity, building bridges across silos, and delivering results that center community voice. Can you take us back to when you first decided to embark on this career path and discuss what initially sparked your interest in community-centered work?
Yeah, absolutely. I start with being a kid. That's the foundation of who we all are. And I think, my experience as a brown kid growing up in this country, but more specifically growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is, of course, one of the more diverse cities, but not a large city, right? Just hovering around 100,000 people in the great state of Michigan, but also one of the more educated places that one can grow up. And I think what's even more dynamic is that I'm first generation American. And that my mother was actually born in Korea and was adopted at 11 years old here in the United States. So, I have a twin brother as well, and she found herself pregnant with twin boys her senior year in college, completely unexpected and unplanned. And that sort of reality, right? Being first generation American, not having a father in your life, and growing up in a pretty privileged city and highly educated city where you usually saw 2-parent homes, highly educated and highly resourced, was a unique sort of situation during our lives. And yet that shaped us, because here we are being born and raised in a community that is relatively open-minded. And yet we're the outliers, right? And what that created, what that pretty much gave us the foundation, or specifically me gave the foundation to, was that one, we were different. 2, we were going to be treated differently. And 3, those differences we could either take as a negative, and there were, right? There were lots of discrimination, lots of profiling, or we could use that and say, we're going to stand up and we're going to stand out. And that's exactly what we decided to do. And so more specifically, because of the support and the community that was behind us, we were able to recognize and utilize the environment in which we were in to not only take ourselves, but to start burning a new path forward for others to follow who look like us. And so when I was in high school, I decided my junior year that I wasn't just going to be a Black boy who was going to focus on athletics, that I was going to be a Black boy who is going to focus on the historical disadvantages and the historical demise that this country has created. And I was going to do my best to break that down. That's why I decided to get into public service. That's why I decided to climb the proverbial corporate ladder, because I wanted to prove not only to myself, but to others that we can do it too. And we can do it in an impactful way.
Yeah, that's so cool. And it's so inspiring too, just to hear about your mom raising you and your twin as a single parent too. And I can't imagine how challenging that was for her. But it's so amazing to hear that as you were, encountering those challenges of feeling like maybe not that you didn't fit in or that, you were feeling isolated at times, that you still wanted to think of your community as you move forward in your career. And I was going to ask you, were there any particular challenges like as you grew up and got out of Ann Arbor when you went to college or anything? Did you confront any adversity, and if so, how did you overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, every single day. Code switching is something that happens with folks of color every single day. And going to the University of Michigan, going to these historically white institutions, there was a sense that I had to fit in. There's a sense that I had to speak a certain language. We had to write a certain way. We had to speak a certain way. I had to dress a certain way to be accepted. Of course, you didn't always have to do that, right? We have a choice. But to get into a particular profession or to land a job, um, uh, there were significant pressures that where I had to code switch. And I've dealt with that challenge over the last 2 decades. And it hasn't been easy. And yet, I would argue that because white folks feel that I am safe, they feel like there's a connection because we speak similar, because we went to the similar schools, because we have similar upbringings, that uh, 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 that they can see Simon in a leadership role. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but I'm saying they feel a bit safer to promote me, to hire me. And not all of us get that opportunity. And so what where I am now is in a place where um, I can truly say that Simon Peter Foster gets to be authentic. He gets to be authentic, and he gets to use his privilege and his power to ensure that not only that people who look like me, but people who have been historically disadvantaged, have been left out, and voiceless have an opportunity to be heard. There's this one time when I walked into a classroom, and it was an AP classroom class. Everyone, it was the first day, and everyone's walking into the class. And the moment I get to the front door, there's the teacher standing there, and she says, "Excuse me, you're in the wrong class." I'm thinking there's 10, 12 students walking ahead of me who've walked in, but they don't look like me. And I was the one who got stopped. And I just looked at her. I said, "Why?" She said, "Why? What? This is the wrong class. You're in the wrong place." And I just quietly showed her my piece of paper, my schedule. And she said, "Oh, okay, go ahead." To start the year off like that, to start that you are different, that you're not as good, is a challenge that we always have to overcome every single day. And my biggest response to that is to be authentic. But to be authentic, you have to learn and love you. So learn and love you. Learning is the historical aspect of understanding our ancestors and knowing the foundation of which we stand on, and live you authentically means that if you understand where you came from and you stand on the backs and shoulders of so much amazingness, intelligence, beautifulness, then you can go out in the real world and be you.
Wow, thank you so much for that. I know that's going to be super valuable for our listeners to hear. I know you mentioned that, you wanted to prove to others that we could do it too. You didn't want to be the black boy that just excelled in sports. You wanted to be someone that was engaging in public service and doing good for the people and show that we also deserve to be in those rooms. And oftentimes in institutions that are predominantly white or in general, a system that is entrenched in white supremacy, we do feel that pressure to perform, and we often have to work 10 times as hard, and that makes us have to mask who we are, like you said. And so I was wondering if you could dive more into that journey of how you were able to come into your more authentic self and finally take down that mask in places and institutions where we really feel like we have to overperform and conform.
Yeah. There's this moment when I was I was in Michigan. I was working for a transportation authority, and um, I was in charge of community and policy relations for the authority. And I was invited to serve on a committee. It's a human services uh, committee, but it was the vast majority of the committee members were white and business owners. And one of the initiatives that they wanted to take on was to ensure that our local social services, including hospitals and soup kitchens, and access to you know uh, medical care and things like that, uh, uh, serve disproportionately more Black and Brown folks, and they were looking for ways that how we can garner more access to those services. And one of the commission, or they were called commissioners, but one of the committee members had said during a meeting, as we were trying to come up with ways and avenues and resources to garner more access for this community, said, listen, we business matters, right? They're like, businesses matters, and we can't have a ton of folks show up in a particular area from that particular population in front of businesses or downtown, because that's going to create a very unwelcoming downtown. And I just had to pause, because he wasn't just talking about just generally a number of people. I mean, we had just touted the numbers, right? At that time, it was 40% of folks who needed those services were people of color, Black folk. And he said openly, in a indirect, direct way, he didn't want Black folk downtown because it was going to devalue businesses. And I had to sit there and say, how am I going to use my power today? Because I'm sitting at the table. And I want to be clear here, because there's a lot of things going on in my mind at that moment. It was, well, one, right? Maybe we've made some significant progress in this country because, well, Simon gets a seat at the table. Okay, well, fine. Simon gets a seat at the table. But does Simon get the opportunity to, one, feel comfortable enough and safe enough to use that space and use his voice and his seat to engage in power? One. Two, am I going to get ostracized or kicked out of that table when I exercise my power? And so, what did I do? Well, in that moment, I decided to speak up. And I said, that is absolutely absurd and unacceptable. That sort of level of, of thought, and I just called it what it is. We got to call it what it is, of racism, of discrimination, is going to continue to prevent this country from moving forward and accomplishing its dream, its promise to its members of its community. And so I articulated that very clearly, and many folks got quiet. Now, here's what ended up being the result: agreement that we were going to utilize more resources to ensure that folks could get downtown, that it was going to be led by community members that look like participants, and that we weren't going to disengage from allowing those resources to happen, even if people were concerned that businesses might not feel as welcoming to this community, which is to the contrary. Just want to say that these are your consumers. I just want to be clear. And so, and consumers and family members of your consumers. So afterwards, and this is before all of the implementation when the vote happened, I had 4 people come up to me and say, they were all white folks, and said, Simon, we didn't speak up. We didn't speak up for you. We didn't support you. We were quiet, and we're ashamed. We're ashamed we didn't do that, but we want to do it now. And I said, your silence is your violence. Your silence is your violence. And if you're going to stand, it's not Black and brown folk that have the burden of consistently sharing their experiences and not being believed. It's the burden on the oppressor to say enough is enough. My community cannot continue to be the harm. Because we all take that responsibility as individuals. It's my responsibility to go get the education. It's my responsibility to wake up in the morning and be on time and show up with my best self. It's my responsibility to go work out and eat better if I want to have a better health and better wealth, right? That's my responsibility as an individual. It is their responsibility as oppressors to use their power and say enough is enough. So I share that story with you all and your listeners, because there are going to be many moments in your life where you're going to be at a crossroad, where you're going to have to make a decision, and you're going to have to be the outlier, and you're going to be uncomfortable. Well, folks, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's where the change happens.
I really appreciate you sharing that experience. And there's really so much to unpack there. But I think that you speak so much to the fact that implicit bias has caused folks to be racist and say things that are very discriminatory in subtle and covert ways. And like you'd mentioned, silence is violence, and that it's complicity with the status quo, and also, puts the burden back onto people of color to try to address racism when really white people were the ones that constructed these systems, and the burden should be on them. And so, I think it's important that we do speak up in those moments. But I was also going to ask you just about, your own psychological safety, because I know you mentioned like your brain was swirling around a ton of different scenarios. And I'm sure many of our listeners, I know I've experienced racism in these instances as well, in a room where you're one of the only and you're afraid to speak up, and you're also just like trying to protect your own like well-being in that moment. And so, how did you like manage that after the fact? And I know there's probably other experiences you've dealt with that are similar, but when it comes to psychological safety, what advice do you have for our listeners as well?
Community. The old saying that you are who you hang around with still applies today. And you can either surround yourself with bad news and bad influence, or you can surround yourself with good news and good influence. And that means that you're going to be uncomfortable. It means that Simon Foster wakes up at 5, no later than 5:30 every single morning. It means that he's got to get his butt to the gym. It means that he picks up his Bible app before he picks up his social media app. It means that you call your parents, if you're fortunate to have parents. It means that you serve your community. And it means that you take time off work, that your identity is not your job. And so it's so important that we're surrounded by people who not only love us and can lift us up, but people who challenge us to be better. And I I just want to remind your listeners uh, that it might be difficult because we live in a world where we want to be comfortable and we want to be liked. Well, if you want to move things and if you want to have a lasting impact, not only on your life, maybe your kid's life, maybe your family's life, maybe friends' life, but in the life of so many others, then it means that you must surround yourself not just with like-minded people, but with folks who will challenge you as a human being and therefore make you better.
That's so great. And I completely agree. Community is a lifeline for us, especially when we are in these environments where we're immersed in whiteness almost every single day, especially here in a city like Seattle. And so it can be difficult to find that community, but definitely lean on those that you can relate to, speak openly about your experiences. Vulnerability is strength. I think that's like the hardest thing to realize. And, that's really helped me be able to find that confidence in myself too as I continue to grow in my own career.
Yeah.
It's really commendable that you chose the route to really stand up, and call out racism for what it was when you were confronted with that. And I wanted to know if you had any more advice for people who chose that same route that you did and stood up and were vocal about it, that might face retaliation, and just the things that come with calling out white supremacy and racism in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a good question. Um, have I faced, well, I think, in light of possibly being retaliated against, because we live in our own minds, and historically, what I mean historically, I mean like just the moment yet, like the minute ago, historically. Okay, I'm reminded by Fannie Lou, right, who says that uh, nobody's free until everybody's free. And A. Philip, who says freedom is never given, it's won. And so in these moments where we feel like we might be retaliated against or looked at differently, um, we must make a decision to either fight or stay silent. And that's where we're connecting the authenticity. And I just want to be clear, resilience and fighting doesn't always look like someone standing up and saying, this is unacceptable. We must move in this direction. Here's the reality. Sometimes it's you going home and writing a really good essay and submitting it. Sometimes it's you really doing the work for your chem class, right? And making sure you show up for that test the right way and you get the grade that you deserve. Sometimes it means that you're putting in the work for your own mental health. It doesn't always mean that you're fight the power. And we know that there are so many folks that we can rely on and recognize in history that have not gone about this in a sort of Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, right, sort of way. Uh, some folks decided to raise their kids. Some folks decided to take care of their mom when she got sick. Others opened a nonprofit, Jack and Jill, and decided to say, hey, socially, we're going to be able to be good role models for our community. And someone else decided to open up a gym. So others' dreams might possibly come true and that there's a safe haven for folks to go. So it doesn't mean it looks a certain way. What it does, though, mean is that you recognize your light and you recognize how you can contribute. Because the cost of liberty is less than the price of repression. And so follow your heart, follow your dreams. And you can do it in a very authentic you way. You don't have to do it the Simon way.
That's so powerful. And we all have different roles to play in this fight for justice too. And that, like you said, we have certain gifts. And so it's important that we all tap into those gifts, understand what they are and how we can utilize them, because we may not all be, as visible as some of these activists like an MLK, Malcolm X. We may be like a Toni Morrison who's going to catalog our history, or we may be like a Harriet Tubman that was the one who was
Mhm.
in the Underground Railroad, right? And so it's important for us to reflect on where we've come from, like, you'd said about our ancestry, and understand where our strengths lie. And just pivoting a little bit into your position as Division Director for Housing, Homelessness, and Community Development at King County, you awarded over $425 million to support housing, stability, racial equity, and community well being. Can you discuss the general impact that these dollars have on our communities and the importance of government funding at the state and local levels as it relates to programs geared to mitigate homelessness and housing insecurity?
Absolutely. Being a public servant, and for folks who are not in government, I think it's extremely important that we recognize that legislators or elected officials have a very particular role in voting on a lot of this legislation. But a lot of your bureaucrats, a lot of your directors, your department directors, your division directors have a ton of authority, a ton. And once the bill, and then once the budget is approved or signed, those directors have uh, relatively um, uh, large amount of authority to utilize those dollars. Of course, a lot of those dollars are restricted and are very purposed, but um, quite frankly, these employees have a ton of power. And I think that at King County, we are one of the best counties to award these dollars and in a way where equity is centered. I mean, for goodness sake, we are named after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we've got some ways to go, but we're definitely walking down the path towards and on the pathway of equity. Uh, I'll just say this. One of the biggest initiatives that we were able to have under my duration of time is to really start a program where we are ensuring that smaller providers and that Black and Brown providers, that women providers, that transgender, gay, lesbian providers and leaders have an opportunity and access to ensure that they're able to apply and win a lot of these grant dollars, that they're not going to just your historically large white-led organizations. And what does that mean? Well, that meant that we had to ensure that we had dollars that directly went to these organizations and that they weren't short-term dollars. They weren't one-time stint. Here's $100,000 to get trained on how to apply for government grants, because that's not sustainable. That's band-aid work. Those are talking points. When you get in front of your community, your constituents, you're able to say, oh, well, King County, we're able to help out Black, Brown, and smaller organizations and historically disenfranchised. No, that's short term. So what did we do? Right? Under my leadership, we said, we're going to not be able to utilize $4 or $5 million and just give $100,000 here. No, we are going to use these dollars to say, here's 5 years of financial support for you to go hire a chief financial officer. Here's 5 years of financial support to go hire a chief programs officer or a chief development officer, or to go work with a consultant to build your business better, right? Those are more long-term, sustainable driven programs and opportunities for organizations that historically do not have the resources to bring on that sort of level of staffing. And when we are able to do that, you bring on that level of staffing, they can build those models up and make those organizations more sustainable and therefore more competitive with those grants. That's just one of the things that we're able to do. And we're able to do it across the platform. Of course, being in charge of such a large division and impact, we had things and programs like housing repair. So folks don't know, there are programs where if you are in your home and you need, for example, your roof fixed, but you're on a fixed income and you could potentially not be able to repair, let's say, your roof. Well, we would come in and through a qualifying mechanism, you wouldn't have to pay $1 and we would come out and repair your home. There's other programs where we would give very low interest or no interest loans for you to be able to pay on your mortgage so you can retain your home. There are other programs where we ensure significant amounts of dollars goes towards new affordable homes across this region. And we have another program called Health Through Housing that is just a star, a shining star here at King County, where we were able to open up to 1,200 units of housing, whether emergency or permanent supportive housing for those who were faced with being unhoused. That is support service, that's mental health, that's substance abuse services, that's workforce development. That is bringing community to a region to ensure someone can sign a lease and say, this is now my home. I don't have to pick my things up and leave. And I get 3 hot meals a day, and I get the support services that I need to live a better life and to be potentially a productive, paying citizen here in this region. Those are the things that we got to do. And those are the things that taxpayers are supporting here in King County.
Those types of programs are so important. And when I was working at the Capitol in Olympia, lobbying for community-based organizations that are doing great work for those in our state, I saw firsthand the importance of this funding, especially as our state faces a budget deficit, and the impact that losing those dollars can have. And so I saw firsthand there, and I understood the importance of government and the allocation of resources. And I was wondering if you could explain for folks on the outside looking in who may not be as familiar with how these programs work. A lot of people say, hey, our tax dollars are going towards this, but the issue of homelessness keeps getting worse. I feel less safe. It's just more and more homeless people, and it's not fixing the issue. Can you explain the importance a little bit more to these folks who may not see how these things are impacting people on a day-to-day basis?
I'll say this. Uh, it is relatively complex, the funding mechanisms and so forth and so on. But the situation is not complex. Like where we are is not complex. Okay. The reality is it costs too damn much. There's not anyone who's listening who doesn't say that I'm paying too damn much in rent, paying too damn much in my mortgage, I'm paying too damn much at the grocery store, I'm paying too damn much in gas, and so the reality is that this touches everyone, and so when inflation and the cost of living increases at a rate that overcomes your increase in your wages, then you see exactly what we've seen consistently year over year. And so when we talk about the cost of these programs and I want to be very clear, government is the safety net. For-profit organizations are here for pleasures and for profit making and profit sharing, right? So you want a Bentley, you want a Toyota, you want a motorbike, whatever, you want new clothes. Those are things which we as consumers have a right to make a decision on if we want to utilize our dollars. That's for-profit businesses. Nonprofit businesses are here to produce a surplus, which is equal to a profit, right? That we would call in business for profit regions, but they are here for usually the greater good to make our communities better. And government, I want to be very clear, government is the safety net in our communities. And if you could just imagine, if you could imagine being on a tightrope or a tight line from one mountain peak to another mountain peak, and there is no safety net underneath you, meaning if you fall, you fall, and that's probably the end. We are the safety net. That's government. And I don't know about you all. I want your listeners to hear me out. I don't know about you, but I don't want that last line of defense for my life to potentially fail. And that's where we are right now, folks. That's where we are. So the cost of not doing this right and well will cost people their lives. I want to be very clear. We're talking about hundreds of hospitals going away. You're talking about hundreds of social programs going away. Specifically in this region, you're talking about Medicaid and Medicare. You're also talking about HUD dollars, housing and urban development. We're talking about continuum of care dollars that will directly impact organizations that I've worked for, meaning affordable housing, meaning housing for the homeless, meaning shelters for folks will either be diminished because this administration is saying no, or they're proposing a budget to Congress and saying, we want to cut those dollars. The HUD secretary wants to cut his budget by 51%, folks, billions of dollars. That social network will be diminished. And he's just tearing a hole or taking it away. So we're now, when you are in a predicament, when your friends are in a predicament, when your family members are in a predicament, that safety net now does not exist. That is where we are, folks. And so when we talk about, and when I share this, when we talk about the cost of maintaining a strong safety net, folks, this is life or death. And we don't want a cheap safety net. I don't want just anyone installing the safety net. I don't want any just material. I don't know about you all, but I want something to ensure that it's going to uphold weight. And it's consistently going to be worked on and maintained. And that is what is happening here. So when we talk about the cost varies depending on the program. But just to put it in basic terms, if I had an aggregate number, we're talking about costing for units of shelter, depending if it's, and it varies, right? If it's a shelter unit, right? Maybe a congregate shelter or an enhanced shelter versus a permanent supportive housing, which means you get your own bedroom and support services on site and so forth, right? The cost to do that every single year ranges between $15,000 to $35,000 a year. If we do nothing, if we allow the safety net to go away, it's going to cost anywhere between $65,000 to $85,000 a year per person. And folks, don't think you're not going to pay for it. Don't think, we're going to throw them in jail. Well, folks, jail costs money. You're still paying someone three meals a day. You still have to house them. You got to bed them. You got to keep them safe. You got to make sure that they have medical services, right? You got to pay for those correctional officers. You have to pay for the building. You have to pay the property tax. You have to pay for the lawyers. You have to pay for the judges. You have to pay for the first responders, right? You're paying for the courthouse, right? You're paying for all of those services around just throwing someone in jail. And guess what? They're not even rehabbed. So they perpetually go in and out, in and out, in and out. And they don't get better because then mental health creeps in. And then substance abuse creeps in because I don't know about you all, but when you're a forgotten soul in a country that says you will not be forgotten, you can go down a bad path. And again, we don't practice rehab here. And so to do something, which is what this country is all about, costs us significantly less. So if you're an econ person, if you're a business person, if you're a numbers person, you care about money and you care about saving money and you care about saving lives, then what's always better and more efficient and what's better for cost, for price, is to get someone housed, is to show a helping hand, is to make sure they're fed, is to ensure that they have workforce development, that they garner a license, that they get the tools and the resources that so many of us with privilege have not fallen through the cracks. And so I just want people to recognize that financial difference in tens of thousands of dollars of savings per year to do something than to do nothing.
Thank you so much. Everything you said was so valuable, and I echo like all of that, especially when you were talking about addressing the root cause and that this issue is something that we need to look at holistically and that we need to have these solutions that are viable in the next 10, 15, 20 years, not just the next few months or the next 5 years. And that you mentioned that safety net, and many people I don't think realize that our tax dollars do go to that safety net, not only for the most vulnerable, but for those that may lose their jobs like us, right? Like many of us are privileged. Us sitting right here, we're able to have housing and we have healthcare right now. But say you lose that, if you lose your job, suddenly, you need that safety net, you need unemployment. And so I think you really put that into perspective for folks that a lot of us are closer to these situations of being in unfortunate circumstances than we think. And it's important that we contribute to the greater good with our dollars. And we also hold those accountable that are making these decisions, the legislatures, and all of our elected officials here, especially in local politics, to utilize those dollars where we want. Because if we start to give them to the private, sector, like you said, these businesses, they can use that money for whatever they want, and we don't really have a say. And so, how are we going to take our power back and use our voices?
Yeah, I feel like you did a great job of highlighting that things are increasingly expensive. And in a system that's ran by capitalism where profit is prioritized over the well being of the people, I feel like we're going to continue to see these problems and these disparities, especially for folks that have already experienced systemic racism and systemic barriers. For example, I'm pretty sure here in Seattle, Black people disproportionately represent the unhoused population and those with housing insecurity. So,
Sorry.
absolutely. And pivoting a little bit, we were wondering, can you share a moment in your personal life or career when you faced adversity and how you overcame it? And if you have any words of wisdom for those experiencing difficulties in their own lives. I know you gave some work examples about calling out racism, but also any like personal examples you have.
Mhm. Yeah, there's many. And I always say, folks want to, they usually, when folks say, oh, I've been blessed, it's usually a good feeling. Well, some of the best blessings in my life are not the ones that have felt good in the moment. They're certainly the ones that caused me pain. Um, there's a moment in my personal life where I uh, decided uh, uh, to focus more on my career than my relationships with my friends or my family. And when I expressed before talking about community and how important it wasn't coming from a book that I read, or it wasn't coming from a mentor that I had, where they told, "Hey, Simon, the community is important." It came from experience. Because I was so busy climbing the corporate ladder, so busy focused on either chasing a title or chasing a dollar, and making sure uh, that I was proving my traumas wrong, right? Meaning, people didn't believe as I shared that AP story classroom example that happened over and over again, and so I had this complex where I had to prove over and over and over again that I was worthy, that I belonged in this space. And because of that, I focused on that narrative so much that that community that I talked about was so important didn't exist in my life. And because of that, I spiraled down. And I got to the point where I hit bottom. And I needed to get help. But if you can imagine, when I lifted my hand, when I fell to the ground, there was no one to grab my hand because I didn't have that community. And we all go through that at one point or maybe multiple points in our lives. But because I didn't have community, I couldn't get up. So I had to lean in, not only on my faith, but I had to lean in on myself. And so I think multiple people have said this, but as long as you land on your back, it means you're looking up. And so get up. So I encourage folks, if you're listening to this, and maybe you're on your back right now, maybe you know someone on their back, get up. Get up. And it does, what does get up look like is what you're saying right now. What does that mean? Well, that means wake up and make your bed. Wake up and fluff your pillows. If you got a bed, I want you to recognize that is something that you should be thankful for. There are hundreds of thousands of Americans and folks around the world who are waking up on concrete, waking up outside. They're not waking up on a bed. So one is I recognize to be thankful. Two is what get up looked like. It meant that I was going to do something productive. And it meant that I was going to make my bed. And three, it meant that what I needed to do was start investing in that community, because that was going to be more important than simply investing in a title, in a position, at a workplace, or at a job, just because other folks told me I couldn't. And I had internalized that. Because folks, we have an opportunity. Yes, you might not be able to change the reality or the situation that you're in, meaning you're going to have to walk into a black room. Let's say you got to walk into a room and it's black every day, no windows, every day. Well, folks, grab a can of paint and paint that room. That's what we call changing our mindset, because it's too easy to start believing the negative narrative. That's easy work. We can do that every day. There's something negative we can read, watch, hear, believe, see. But we can change our narrative. Our minds are so strong. And so I encourage you to go pick up a can of paint and paint that room. And that's exactly what I did. And it doesn't mean that it has to be something big. It means that you recognize the small things, that you're thankful for the small things, and that you take one step toward being productive and changing your life.
I love that analogy so much that you mentioned with the can of paint, because I think it really like helps folks visualize what it can feel like when you're beholden to your trauma and you haven't addressed it yet. And it seems like that's what you had experienced at that time, where you were trying to prove people wrong because of that seed that had been sowed in you as a kid, right? And so you wanted to convince your boss that you're the best, you deserve the promotion, you deserve that next job. You want to continue to ascend in your career, but you were kind of losing yourself in that process. And so I think, it's important that folks realize that choosing joy is a practice every single day. And you start small. You have those little bits of gratitude. And that's something that Brad and I have shared a lot on this platform, just being able to gather with all of our guests that we have over the past 3 seasons now, and we've met over 40 folks, and been able to carve out this time to sit down and build that community. And so that's something that we intentionally do every day. We make time for it, even if we have to get up early, and we have work afterwards. And so, yeah, I just really want to share that with our listeners. Like, you can create your life to be what you want it to be, and you have the autonomy to do that.
That's right. That's right.
I love that. And I feel like that, emphasizes a point that we've made in other episodes, that, it's okay to understand that you are a victim and that you have been victim to certain things. But there's a difference between being a victim and having a victim mindset. Like you said, it's easy to get caught up in our problems, and our problems are valid. But like you said, changing your mindset to say, hey, I have a bed, I have a car, I can drive to work. A lot of people are not trying to knock public transit, but a lot of people are taking the bus because they can't afford their own personal forms of transportation. And so really looking at the things in life that we take for granted during those times when we are feeling low, because I admit I have to check myself sometimes, because I'm like, wait, I'm sitting here, I'm doing pretty good. Is it really that bad? And so just taking that moment to ground yourself and realize that it's not always the end of the world.
That's right. And folks, even if you are taking the bus, right? Because I take the bus as well. The reality is this, that even when I was in the city of Detroit and I had no money, I had an eviction slip on my door. And I was interning for the city at the time, uh, uh, not making enough to even afford the bus. So I started taking the bus. I couldn't afford it, so I started walking. So I walked the 2 miles in the heat with the suit on, which I only had two of.
You probably got super in shape though. You got your 10,000 steps in.
That's right. I was getting the 10,000 steps, right? So, but I was being positive and I was having impact. And every single time I walked down Woodward in the city of Detroit, I would pass the same business owners and I would say good morning to them. And they would say good morning. And we got to know each other. We started talking about what their experiences were like in the city. And that gave me an opportunity to better understand from a different lens, a different perspective to prepare me for my job. Because eventually I was offered a full-time role at the city of Detroit, which was a very stint after I had started, like literally within 30 days. But if it weren't for that experience, right, I could have been negative. I could have said, poor me. I could have said, I'm not going to get to my internship because I don't have money to even get on a bus, nonetheless a car. But I didn't. I took that opportunity and turned it into an opportunity to learn. And because of that, I was a better employee at the city of Detroit because I became a listener. And so I just want folks to know you're not in your circumstances in light of your failure. You're in your circumstances because there's a lesson to learn to prepare you for tomorrow's achievements. And I want folks to take that seriously, or else we're more prone to have to go through those learning experiences over and over. When someone says, why does all this stuff happen to me? It's because you didn't learn your lesson. And the good old universe is saying, we need you to learn your lesson so you can go out and do the good work that we need you to do. And so I encourage you to really say, you know what, this ain't so bad. And I'm going to be able to take something from this. And I get an opportunity maybe in the future to help someone else out because I get to understand from that lens, which is so important. And so empathy is extremely important. And that's the valuable lessons that I've been able to learn over and over and over again.
Thank you so
That's
much for
oh,
that. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I think a good thing for people to know is that everything that happens is supposed to teach you something. That's a method that I've adopted, when something is wrong, I'll write down, okay, what happened that upset me or that what hardship happened, and then flipping that narrative to what was this supposed to teach me in that moment, rather than thinking, why me? What was this supposed to teach me?
Yes.
yeah, that's so great, Brad. I definitely echo that. And I think it was so cool, Simon, how you talked about the way that you were connecting with those folks, like the business owners and stuff on your walk to work. And you could have been, upset just walking to work, not feeling like I want to even go in, but you made light out of that too. And so I think it's important for our listeners to know that reframe those situations, even though they may not look like blessings in the moment, that actually led to you getting that next opportunity. And so it's just about, understanding that you can make these situations positive, even if you feel like I'm just so beaten down by life at this moment, that you can change it for yourself. So thank you so much for talking about that.
Absolutely.
And moving forward, we're getting to the tail end of the interview, which this has gone so fast. I can't believe it. But your last point that you made really leads well into our next question, which is reflecting on your career thus far. What legacy do you hope to leave behind for leadership whom you eventually will pass the torch to?
That your dreams matter. That your dreams matter. Your dream doesn't necessarily need to look like someone else's. It doesn't have to feel as big. it doesn't need to be so grand. And I think we get caught up in this grandiose sort of, I want to be like this person and that and blah blah blah. And if my dream is not on par with theirs, then it's not good enough. That if you wanted to be um a really good firefighter, I'm not right saying lesser. I'm just saying if you want to be a really good firefighter to save people's lives, and you got courage enough to go into a fire, because I don't. um Good, because that's the way the community needs you. If you want to be a great teacher, which is one of the hardest, toughest jobs out there, be a darn good teacher. And folks, if you want to be a stay-at-home parent, then be the best stay-at-home parent that you can be. And so I just want folks to recognize, and I want to leave you all with that, hold fast to your dreams. If your dreams die, then life is broken. Dream often and dream well and never give up. Because if you fall on your back, it's not falling down that's going to end your dream. It's not getting back up.
Thank you so much for that. And I just genuinely want to thank you for being vulnerable and sharing all of your experiences, in your career and personally, because I know it's inspiring me, and a lot of listeners who have dealt with similar things can look at you and say, hey, he was walking 2 miles to work every day in his suit in the heat. And now look at where Simon's at. Look at, so I feel like your story really shows people that sky is the limit, and that where you start doesn't define where you will finish. And I really appreciate that. And our final question that we have for you is something that we ask all of our listeners. Black people we're not a monolith. Our experiences aren't the same. We all have our unique experiences. And for example, you mentioned being a first generation American. And so we were wondering, based on your unique experience, what does Blackness mean to you?
Um, uh, Blackness means excellence. It was the first paper I wrote about. I remember in middle school, I had a phenomenal teacher who was actually a white male, older white male at the time, who's now recently passed. Said, can you talk about you just as a human? You're going to write a letter to yourself, and then you're going to open it up 20 years later. And I wrote about, at that time, I was experiencing a lot of profiling and sort of microaggressions, discriminatory experiences in my life, becoming from a boy to a man and growing up. And I wrote to myself that you matter and that you are excellent and you will always be excellent. And so that means that everything I did, I put my best foot forward. That doesn't mean that you're going to be the best swimmer on the swim team or you're going to be the best ball player. That doesn't, or you're always going to get all A's. It just meant that I was going to put my best foot forward. And that doesn't mean that you're always going to have all of the energy, right? Today, I might have woken up at 5 and said, I got a lot of energy. I'm really perked up and ready to go to the gym. And I put my best foot forward. And tomorrow, that might mean I'm a little tired. I got a little less energy. I'm still going to put my best foot forward, but it might not look like what it did yesterday. And that's okay. Because when I reread that letter, I've got it framed. When I was talking about excellence, I was talking about putting my best foot forward with what I could give in that moment. That I agreed on that contract between me and myself and I. And so, folks, put your best foot forward and never doubt that that's not good enough.
Thank you so much. I always love hearing all of our guests' little personal stories and how, we've conceptualized Blackness through our lives. And you had a little bit of pain there that you kind of wrote that letter out from, but you were able to turn that into pride. And so I think it's important that people realize, take pride in what you do, show up and do your best every single day. And your dream, it should matter to you. It shouldn't matter to anyone else, and that it doesn't need to be something that you've already seen before. You may not know what it is yet, and you're going to discover it along the way. And everyone has their own unique path. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you. And I just want to say before we wrap up, you two are so inspirational to me. You both deciding to utilize your time and this platform to help others is extremely motivational. And I just want to say thank you so much for all the work that you're doing as well. So phenomenal work. And what a sacrifice you are giving as well.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. And, we're just really grateful that people even want to talk to us and come on this platform. When we first started it, it was, very informal. We were reaching out to people we knew, and now it's grown to be national. And we have like so many nominations. We're just trying to figure out how we're going to find the time to talk to everyone. But yeah, those little words of affirmation that you give us really help us to continue to keep going.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Simon. I know that I was inspired by this interview and hearing what you went through and how you've overcame it. And I know that others will as well. And so I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us today.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Have a great week. And we'll be in touch when this airs in the fall. So
Yes.
thanks
All right,
again.
let's keep dreaming. Let's keep dreaming. And let's
We
make
will.
sure that we're going to practice in excellence. Y'all have a great week.
You too. Thank you so
Bye.
much.
Yeah, bye-bye.
We deeply appreciate your support as we work to uplift the Black community and explore our unique experiences within the Black diaspora on Identity Unboxed.
Authenticity is your guide to cast an impact on the world that you will be proud of. Signing off with pride, Tiana
and Brad.
Thank you so much.